All right. This is D-Boy from West Coast Uncensored. How's everybody doing? Man, just kind of doing some. I've been doing some work today. Monday's always a day off for me, and so I always try to pull some podcast in. I still have later today. I will do my other podcast on later today, probably after this one drops. I will do one on um, Mayhem Mondays for professional wrestling rumors and reviews of what's happening in some of the scuttlebutt happening in professional wrestling, and some of the talk, insider talk, and rumors, which not always true. But this one is got to say something about this. Today's a tough day living in LA, and definitely the morning it's been going on since Kobe death. So I just dropped a Kobe Bryant. Uh, a Kobe Bryant one with a perspective, not really the West Coast Uncensored type of thing as far as sports perspective. It was more life perspective and a positivity and just a reality, because living in LA, it's been a mourning ever since that day that it happened. And just so what I want to talk about today, though, this isn't the wrestling podcast. This is a couple of weeks ago, probably pushing 3 to 4 weeks ago. I talked about harrell being interviewed for the Philadelphia Eagle jobs, and I never kind of came back and said it. He was interviewed. I had some views on that, so I just kind of wanted to rebut what I said. It really isn't a rebuttal, because in that podcast I did say that he was being interviewed. I did kind of say that he probably would take it. I would understand why, but the reality of it, he wasn't taken. He did not go to Philadelphia. In fact, he stayed home. So by him staying home, he's staying at USC. USC since then has gone forth and restructured their coaching staff, and they definitely, with the restructuring of the coaching staff, has made some changes. Clay Helton's still there. He's still the head coach. I don't know how much. I would say he doesn't have a lot of power. They hired Todd Orlando as a defensive coordinator, who has been at other places, most recently Texas. Last year was Texas's worst year, so they fired him. But the reality, when you look back at what Texas had done the last 3 or 4 years under him, he had produced good physical attacking defenses. And last year it kind of had a drop off, and that's why they wanted to go a different way. But the reality of it is their defense was ravaged by injuries. So they hired Todd Orlando as their defensive coordinator, getting rid of the other defensive. Definitely, they just made a wholesale changes with their defense. He hired a safety coach, also, who's an outstanding coordinator. So they got rid of Johnny Nason. They got rid of definitely the defensive coordinator. He got rid of defensive back coach that was there. They hired a defensive line coach that has been. It's actually there's actually a family of USC legend and linebacker. Number 55. They actually hired him. God, he's slipping my name, and I should know him. All-time great in the NFL. It's actually his cousin. His last name is Soto, if I'm saying it right. Definitely Polynesian. They hired him. He's very young. He's only in his early 30s. Had been defensive line coach over at University of Virginia. And if you say, well, what's that? What's that is University of Virginia made a top 6 bowl last year, had one of their best years ever. And under the coaching staff there had made big strides going forth, and he had made strides in recruiting. He's in the division with Clemson and with Florida State, and he was able to go out and get some really good players. And he has that Polynesian kick. He actually, like I said, he definitely has that connection. He is a Southern California guy from San Diego, and he came over, and also with the safety, his last safety coach Navar, Navir, who's a Texas guy, that coached with Todd Orlando in Texas, who's a safety guy who had developed some really young, good safeties those years in Texas that became All-Americans, all league first team. and Texas runs a really good, that Texas under him is a very physical defense. I don't believe Clay Helton totally made these hires. I believe a lot of these hires were by Mike Bone, the new athletic director. So he was able to get Graham Harrell. He was able to get secure Todd Orlando. And then Todd Orlando was bringing some of his guys in that he has connections with that were part of his defensive coaching staff. So kind of what I see, and then definitely is that the two, it's possible that these two offensive coordinators have power to hire their own staffs, and it really wasn't into the head coaches. So take that as you will. It usually doesn't go good in the long run for the head coach, but I do think these hires that were done on the offensive side of the ball and also the defensive side of the ball were huge. Remember this in the long run, even though everybody was upset that Mike Bone did not make the changes with Clay Helton. Remember, Mike Bone did not hire Clay Helton, and that always means a lot. When the player, whether it's the NFL general manager doesn't hire, it's not his guys. The general manager, this isn't his coaches. Usually he wants to bring in his people. And when it's all said and done, as we look through this was kind of the upper president and them not allowing Mike Bone to go the way he did. Mike Bone, from what I understand, was ready to bring in Bob Stoops to be the head coach. And the upper management kind of the president and some of those people that were in that situation ended up being, was able to get him not to make those choices. But since then, some of this, what Petros Papadinkas, a Southern California radio guy, sports guy, former Trojan, has said is they've made some fires in the athletic department, and it goes with what was said by Petros earlier in the season that before you could have the power, you have to drain the swamp, because you don't have power unless the swamp was drained. And then he brought in some other people that are not USC people. What I mean by that are not that line of the people who wanted power, because the people wanted power, wanted Clay Helton to stay in charge because they realized they have power with that. If they bring in a really top-notch, like they lost power when they had Pete Carroll, because let's face it, when you bring in a top-notch head coach, they have a lot of power. Definitely, if they brought in Bob Stoops is going to want power. He's going to want raises for coaches. And from what I understand, they even met and came to agreement for Bob Stoops' money. But Bob Stoops wanted good money for his assistants to stay. USC has did that from what I hear with the D coordinator from Harrell and from Todd, the new defensive coordinator, and in Harrell, they've made this up. But here's the last hire that we know of. The defensive line guy was the last hire, the one from Virginia. He definitely, this was the second to last hire. This is very, to me, significant. They went and got Dante Williams, who was the defensive back and passing game coordinator of the defense for the Oregon Ducks, who won the conference last year, who actually even won the Rose Bowl, and Dante Williams did this last year. He was Pac-12 Recruiter of the Year. Yes, he was, in the conference. So the coup is that USC went and plucked from Oregon the top recruiter in the conference, and already you could see dividends being placed. That the Navarre, who's a great recruiter, the Texas safety, and Todd Orlando, the defensive coordinator, and Soto, I might not be saying his name right, the Samoan brother that came from from Virginia, and is now the defensive line coach. Is what's happened is these guys are all about recruiting. They go and build relationships, and you could already see it. Just the last 2 years with the change of the earlier signing in December, USC used to not go full out early, and what would happen, they would close late because February would be the closing day. Now with February not the closing day, the last 2 years, and especially this year, was costly. You have to recruit early, you have to recruit often, because you have to drive the signing, not February anymore. You got to do it December. And these guys are all about their recruiting. They're already getting people. There's already been some decommits from Oregon that were all related to Deontay Williams who have decommitted from Oregon and opened up the recruiting. I believe that Deontay Williams and the other coaching staff from Texas, meaning that their connection that they had is that you will start seeing some guys from the South, especially the Texas and Louisiana areas that they were recruiting heavily and have built relationships, will be able to get some of those guys there, and it would be needed, especially on the D line and O line, because the California kids in recruiting are not producing the size. They're producing. This is what Southern California as a mass. When you get the 4 or 5 kids that are the big top defensive linemen and offensive linemen from this area, you got to lock them down. But here's what's happening is there's a very few. The top things that are coming from California is good quarterbacks and great quarterbacks, and a bunch of and this is what's changed immensely from 5, 7, 10, 15 years ago. The best athletes are now wide receivers. They're not running backs. From the NFL, with the devaluing of the running backs into the passing game, it is with the quarterbacks being great athletes, just not pocket passers, but now great athletes using their athletic ability to either move the pocket and roll and toss, or they run around, not just always to run for yardage, but they'll run around to make a deep play downfield. Is that California produces the top quarterbacks. The top 2 quarterbacks from Southern California this year have went to Clemson and to Alabama. That shows you. It was those 2 top quarterbacks, those 2 top-notch schools, playoff championship schools, came to California. Back in the day when Pete Carroll was here, they wouldn't have sniffed it. So USC's now these coordinators, these 2 coordinators, and the changing of coaching staff, because the former coaching staff that Clay Helton had when they were here, there was only 1 or 2 that were recruiters. The last 2 years, because of the early signing, they were starting to do what they did before. It worked because SC would close strong and still finish in the top 5 or 10. But the last 2 years with this February, this early signing, and 80 to 85% of the top-notch recruits are doing the early signing. They're not waiting for February. Is not the main day like it used to be. It's kind of sad, but that's just the reality of it. It's December. So you got to be about the business now. USC, with the new recruiting and the new guys that they have in because the thing, if you're going to do Southern California, you're going to try to get Southern California O-line and D-line, you have to because of the change of diet out here, a lot of people eat healthier. But you go to Texas and on in the South, guess what you get? You're getting the Hosses still. That's what's the biggest advantage of the SEC, is that they get the big guys up front, the Hosses that they get. The Hosses number has dwindled. Now out here, you're getting defense. In defense, linebackers. You can get linebackers, defensive backs, the great athletes. You can get some running backs, but there's an incredible amount of receivers in the state, a incredible amount of top-notch quarterbacks. That's why Alabama and Florida are coming here to get their quarterbacks. Oklahoma wants to come here and get their quarterbacks. So you've got to protect the state, but the new recruiting and the change. So the upbeat thing is getting Deontay Williams is it was piercing to Oregon by their demeanor in that, and he's already made an influx of people decommitting there, and he'll be about his business, and he is a Southern California guy, and he wanted to be near to his family and friends, and I think he was paid good, and he will do what he does in the recruiting and also in the defensive back. I think he'll go perfectly. He should go perfectly with Todd Orlando and the safeties coach and the linebacker coach they brought in. So with the offensive line, we have Graham Harrell bringing in one of his own quarterback coach that he used to coach with over at Texas Tech and over at West Texas, where he came from, or Texas State. So you see the comfortability. Graham Harrell right now and Todd Orlando have a lot of power. Will this backfire? I don't think so. I do think that this team has got so many returners that they were so young that they will be okay this year. It could be next year or the year after that this bad recruiting class that they had this year. But the way to shift that is go ahead and be SC and be that top-notch program that recruits like crazy. And they brought in some good guys. And I think we're at the point, if Clay Helton can't win with what he's got now, he definitely will be in the hot seat. He may be on the hot seat anyways, because anybody who knows, and he's not Mike Bones' guy. He might go and didn't hire him. To not just knock on Clay We just seen the results. At the time they hired Clay, he was the adult in the room. The other coaches they had were still childhood. You had Sarkisian drinking, and you had Lane Kiffin just not emotionally being able to drive the team and make good decisions. I do think either one. I do think Lane is probably good now. I think the maturity and then sitting under, sitting over there with Saban for a few years will make you mature and will make you grow up some. So he probably is ready. And of course, he went to Mississippi State. There was rumors that Sarkisian was at Colorado, but I guess he's not. They hired Carl Durrell. So what I wanted to say, I did put out a video because it appeared that Graham Harrell did have an interview at Philly, but didn't take the job or they didn't hire him. It's really never been clear, but he did have the interview as offensive coordinator. They did hire some people, but for what it appears at Philly, that they didn't make it a quarterback hire. And maybe this is why. Maybe Doug Peterson, who's still, from what I know now in the NFL at Philadelphia, still going to call plays, and maybe that's what stopped Graham Harrell, because he's an offensive coordinator, and offensive coordinator, and Graham, I want to go here, I want to call plays, and maybe Peterson didn't want to give that up. There's just kind of some things leery about that, but Graham Harrell stayed. Graham Harrell has remained, and then full great changes on offense, but really on defense, and also adding some recruiting stuff, because the Texas guys are big time recruiters, and getting Dante Williams from Oregon to come back to Southern California was really good. And I could see, and they're actually on the beat of recruiting heavily now. Top notch players they're offering, and Darrell, from what I know, Darrell and Navarre and that the defensive coordinator are out there popping off recruiting, and so is Graham Harrell. So Graham Harrell's offense in the second year, definitely. So I was wrong before, not that he took the job. I expected him to take a job when the NFL knocks usually take it, but obviously it didn't work out in that manner and in that way. Graham Harrell did stay at USC, and there's big changes. Gives the USC, the people, some hope again, because I do like the changes. Todd Orlando made it clear that they were not going to be soft, and that we've seen a lack of good practice time on the defensive side, because we've seen a USC team the last 2 and 3 years, poor tackling, didn't look physical at times, was ran on, missing tackles. And from what we know from Todd Orlando, he don't play that. And he's talked about, no. We're going to practice physical, because practicing physical is what you do on Saturday. If you practice physical, you'll take that mindset to Saturday. And USC fans are going, that's a breath of fresh air. I don't see Clay Helton holding him back. He really can't. The best thing Clay could do is let these OCs do their thing. And if they go 10-2, 11-1, have a very successful year, he's the head coach. He's a great manager. If they drop to 9-3, 8-4, I don't know about Clay. I don't. This team, with so many of the returners, especially on offense and some of the things they do, they should be the favorite in the South. A lot of the teams, and then the North, some of those teams are losing their quarterbacks. So definitely something else going on. This is West Coast Uncensored. This is D-Boy. Hit me up on westcoastuncensored.com. Hit me up there. We got other podcasts coming later. Have a great day.